You might be asking what I mean by mainstream musicals. I basically mean live-action musicals that appeal to an audience of all or most ages, like any other big movie playing in almost every movie theater, but make it a musical. That said, though, I am excluding animated children's musicals, and I do so with a good reason. Animated children's musicals never went away because kids can suspend their disbelief about random breakouts into song and dance in a way that adults just can't. In fact, kids almost prefer it. Adults need a degree of realism in order to be on board with a story, so song and dance is really hard to pull off. But kids have always been convinced by random music, so animated children's musicals have never gone away. Live-action musicals that are directed towards all ages, on the other hand, aren't quite as common, or rather weren't, until very recently. This is a chart of live-action mainstream movie musicals from 2010 to 2019. As you can see, in the first 6 years of the decade, there was a lot of fluctuation. In 2010 and 2011, of the 3 musicals that came out, 2 of them were huge successes. In 2012, they put out 4, and 2 of them were bombs, and of the 2 successes, one was more of a young adult movie than anything else, so its appeal was pretty narrow. 2013 saw some easing back, down again only to 1 musical, only to jump back to 4 in 2014, and then back down to 2 in 2015. In general, 2010 to 2015 saw musicals, but in scarce numbers with hills and valleys depending on what had worked in the previous year. In those 6 years, musicals were a guest in the wide-release general moviegoer market with an average of 2.3 musicals per year. Then in 2016, there was only 1 mainstream live-action musical, La La Land, a movie that worked as a love letter to old musical cinema like Singin' in the Rain, but it also existed as something modern and familiar to current audiences, and it appealed to everyone. Audiences of all ages, critics, and award committees couldn't get enough of La La Land, and it even won Best Picture. Oh, what? No, it didn't? Okay, but it won a bunch of other Oscars, including Best Song, for which it held 2 out of the 5 nominations. And La La Land revived another original musical that had been in development hell for 10 years, The Greatest Showman. The Greatest Showman had sat idle in development hell since 2007, while studios debated whether or not an original musical could ever fare well among modern mainstream audiences. Enter La La Land to steal the show and convince Hollywood that such a thing was possible, something that none of the 14 musicals from 2010 to 2015 could accomplish. And though many considered Showman to be mediocre as a movie, the soundtrack was a smash hit and made many audience members feel as though their time in the theater wasn't so wasted after all. And Showman wasn't alone. 2017 was also graced by 2 other musicals, Beauty and the Beast and Pitch Perfect 3. That goes up in 2018 to 4 musicals, with Mary Poppins Returns, Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again, A Star Is Born, and Bohemian Rhapsody. All 4 films enjoyed critical acclaim, and Bohemian Rhapsody kicked off a still rising trend of biographical films about musicians. 2019 tops the chart with 6 musicals: Aladdin, Cats, Rocketman, Yesterday, Blinded by the Light, and The Lion King. And before anyone says The Lion King was animated, yes, I know it was, but it was shot and framed like a live-action film, not to mention designed to look as photorealistic as possible. In general, it's referred to as the live-action Lion King, and therefore I count it. In the latter 4 years of the 2010s, musicals have only gone up, with an average of 3.5 musicals per year, and it's looking like that will only go up from here. The release date of any movie is anyone's guess thanks to a certain pandemic, but the musicals that have been confirmed for the coming years are plentiful to say the least. West Side Story, In the Heights, Wicked, not to mention biopics like the currently untitled Elvis movie, or movies based on musicals that are based on movies like Spamalot and Mean Girls. Back to the main question of this study. Why are musicals coming back to the mainstream? What planets had to align to make an average cinema audience ready to go listen to some catchy tunes while munching on their popcorn? Well, I believe there are a few different good reasons. First and foremost, the most successful mainstream musicals of the last few years have used music as a character of its own. Take La La Land, for example. The story of this movie focused so deeply on jazz, with a protagonist whose passion was the great jazz musicians of old, and saving what many people around him considered to be a dead genre. And the symbolism isn't lost on me that this movie, in turn, saved what some might have called a dead genre of film. But with jazz so central in the story of La La Land, it's no wonder that all of the music pays tribute to that with its jazzy style and motifs. It ties music into the world of the film, integrating it in a way that feels comfortable for modern audiences. And by so overtly being a tribute to old musicals with the characters just singing out of nowhere, any instance of a spontaneous musical number is justified by just how central this purpose of the film is. The Greatest Showman did something similar. The whole movie is about modernism and putting on a show that's contemporary for its time, so all of the music in the film is contemporary by today's standards, adhering to the same pop style that audiences would be familiar with. In biopics like Bohemian Rhapsody, one could say that the main character isn't even Freddie Mercury, but rather the music of Queen, and the same statement, but make it Rocketman. The same can also be said for adaptations like Aladdin, which work just as much to adapt the original music in a way that puts it at the forefront of the film as an entity, or like Beauty and the Beast, which have original music that drives the story along the new path that the writers have concocted. The musicals that were coming before didn't accomplish this in the same way as the ones that we're seeing now, which almost seem to have it down to a science. Another possible reason for this musical resurgence could be nostalgia. Every musical we're seeing now seems to harken back to some other era, whether it be the musicals of the 50s, the great contemporary musicians of the 20th century, or maybe even just the animated Disney movies of the 90s. It's worth noting, after all, that before musicals resurged, Disney made live-action Cinderella as a regular movie. And some people are of the belief that these throwback films elicit an emotional response that resonates with all audiences. A movie like Bohemian Rhapsody or Rocketman generates nostalgia for the people who remember Queen or Elton John's heyday, an interest in this music for a whole new generation. It's limiting to think that only one of these reasons is the right answer as to why musicals are coming back. I believe that it's all of these reasons, and probably even a few more. I think it took a synthesis of musicals doing a lot of things right to finally capture audiences in the way that they have for the past few years, things that they weren't accomplishing for a while, so they adapted to become a renewed, modern musical genre that has grown past the standard breaking out into song. Musicals can still have this trope, or they can forego it completely and integrate musical numbers into the narrative. It's not only a resurgence of musicals, but a renaissance, and we're witnessing its first steps onto the big screen.